And we can tell our family that it's
they're
on a different live, but it's a different link now. It's not that link.
Should I try to find the link?
I don't know. You just go on my YouTube and it should be live. Like they should just go on my YouTube. Okay. Yeah, we're good. We're good to go. Yeah, so no one should sit.
Okay, we are ready to begin.
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry for a bit of a delay. I was trying to get the live stream started so my family can join us from all over the world. So I'm happy that that's been started now and that you're all here. My name is Schola. I'm an MDes public student in my final year. This is my final project, so here we are. Very exciting. And my focus actually is on affordable housing and real estate development, but I'm here today to give you the context. Background in architecture as well, and also Nigerian American, first generation, born in the U.S. But today, I stand before you as someone asking the question, after war, what do we rebuild from? And maybe more importantly, how do we remember? Together, we gather to collectively uncover a history that has been forgotten, blurred, erased, and yet still living in the hearts of millions. The Biafran War, or the Nigerian Civil War of 1967 to 1970, left an estimated 3 million people dead, and many still struggling to be seen. I wanted to actually begin this conversation with a bit of the context. I actually started this about a month and a half ago. I have a different topic also focused on Nigeria, also focused on Africa, but on diaspora's investment into their places of origin. And right now you're looking at a map that is showing Nigeria, maybe outlined through its ancestral homeland of the 3 major tribes, the loudest pieces of Nigeria, maybe we'll say. On the east is the Igbo people, my people. The west is the Yoruba, and the north is the House of Fulani. But within this, over 200 tribes remain on this in this country. And I really began looking at this map and others as a story, a map that tells a story of values, of economies, of justice and community, and having dialogue in different ways throughout our tribal ancestral origins and what we believe and what we've always known to be. So from that, this is very preliminary, but I wanted this project to offer the beginnings of a reconciliation framework that's rooted not in blame, but in shared values that Nigerians have always had. So this is quite preliminary. Again, I actually began this a month ago. So yes, it's early, but it's a heads up for me as to the real path forward of whatever we build must be already ancestrally within us. So to begin our activity that we will be doing together, you each received a piece of a puzzle when you walked in. Hope everyone has a puzzle, or at least we ran out of puzzle pieces, so that's the best goal. Awesome. So we will begin this by having this opportunity to share these pieces of the Nigerian Biafran Civil War and partake in some memorialization in a very Nigerian style of really oral storytelling and these histories. And these pieces hold a 3-part value system. One is resistance, pre-war. The second is ingenuity during the war, and the second is silence and memory after the war. So on the other side of your puzzle piece, you'll see a piece of a poem or a question. And they're numbered, so that'll help you place them on this board to my right. And I'll ask each of you to read that piece when the time comes, after I finish talking about the section that we've begun with. So throughout this, we'll have the opportunity for conversation, and by no means am I a historian. I'm sure not many of you are on the Biafran Civil War, but we can all see the roles that each of us could partake in devastation, and especially and even simply in the act of remembering. So I give you permission here to look at the pictures that I'll have here, to just close your eyes and listen, to read the words as I read them, or to just be in this space with me as we go through a pretty difficult history as well. So now, we build this collective tapestry together, uncovering how, even in devastation, people created, innovated, and remembered. And we'll begin with the theme of resistance. So it's really necessary to start at the onset of what we know today as Nigeria. So the British, Britain's 1914 amalgamation of Nigeria forced together over 200 distinct ethnic groups, collapsing the northern, western, and eastern protectorates. This map is beginning to show an ethnic divide of Africa with the white outlines and the cream in the background. This is a map of Nigeria and its individual ethnic groups, still more conglomerated, so this is not the full extent of them. But this bureaucratic merger ignored centuries of cultural, linguistic, and political autonomy. Resistance wasn't always loud, but it was ever present in the quiet persistence of traditional structures, in the unease of imposed rule, and in local skepticism of a central identity that never really took root. Even after the independence in 1960, the country remained divided along colonial protectorates in the north, west, and east. These regions preserved political rivalries and competing visions for Nigeria's future. And in mid-1960s, it was marked by violence and exposed the fragility of this national unity, including a state of emergency declared by our first leader of Nigeria in 1962. So this Igbo welcome, the first collage image that we see here, is a sign that stands in Lagos as a haunting symbol of a fractured promise. Together, all of these pieces will reveal how political power struggles, even rooted in differences in tradition, indigenous governance, etc., conglomerated by colonial forces. In 1966, political coups and tribal tensions erupted into targeted violence. An estimated 50,000 Igbo people were killed in the north, particularly in Kano and Kaduna, but near the federal territory of Lagos as well as Ibadan. And forcing survivors really to flee southward to their home villages. The Asaba massacre in the southeast here. Sorry, the map is actually, you guys see the full map? Yeah. Lagos, Ibadan, Kaduna, and Kano, and Asaba. The Asaba massacre occurred in August of 1967, during which civilians were dragged out of their homes in Delta State, and it's noted that about 100 men were killed as federal troops raided civilian homes. So these pogroms deepened Igbo resolve, mourning and mobilization intertwined. Biafra secession, eventual secession, became not a political but existential. And in May 30th of 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu declared the Republic of Biafra. It was a proclamation born out of grief and urgency. And this also began the war, as the head of Nigeria, General Yakubu Gowon, saw Biafra as a threat to national unity, as well as a threat to the extraction of resources, that particularly oil, in the southeastern region. And this was actually our first televised African war. This showcased the widely known image of the starving African child, but ignored much of the innovation, like what we're seeing juxtaposed to the television screen, that came out of Biafra, which I will discuss more throughout this presentation. And as images of starving Biafran children reached global press, international figures like Muhammad Ali, Angela Davis, and many others, protesters around the world saw this as a necessary action. And the media, like the BBC, became both advocates and adversaries in shaping the narrative of Biafra and Nigeria. So I'd like to invite whoever has a piece of a puzzle that says resistance to have your puzzle piece ready. And if you're number one, if you can please read that piece. Number two will go after you. You don't have to read the word resistance, you can just read what comes after. So we can begin with number one. And the question, whoever has the question will go last. So if you have that question, you can just wait a second.
So who has resistance number one?
A welcome sign fades where borders bleed. Still, footsteps look a little road.
The sun begins to rise.
Halfway.
They watched us through glass, but never saw the hands that built the silence.
World's gaze arrives, too late, with pity louder than aid.
And then we have a question? Oh, no, we have one more.
Yes.
One more.
A pin pressed on wool, one small country stitched into protest.
No, this is resistance. And it could be under question.
Does someone have resistance with a question on that? That's the word resistance.
No, that's not you.
It just said the word resistance in all caps and then a question. If not, I would invite anyone who had those pieces. You can also begin to place them on the board. So it'll match with the word resistance and you'll begin to search. I can help you as well with this
So
process.
everybody who has resistance should come put their piece up. Something that looks like a flag.
And as they're beginning to look. Yay. And as they're beginning to look, I will read the question out loud, which is, the question is, how do you think forced migration from one's home reshapes one's memory of place? And I'm gonna ask two people can give any comments on that, generally from your own experience or from ones that you've seen or your own research. How do you think forced migration from one's home reshapes one's memory of place?
So she'd like to give two responses. Why? Anybody?
Sure, could you repeat your question again?
Yes. How do you think forced migration from one's home reshapes one's memory of place?
Fragments it.
Oh, Kiki and then Emery.
It fragments the memory, right? So you have like probably the center and then the peripheries, and then anywhere along the peripheries of those memories is where the memory is open for interpretation. So I think that anything that they either favor or anything that was a source of trauma would start to shift and not be like as clear. And this is where you might have like discrepancies of like a specific memory between two people based off of what they experienced.
I think also as you're thinking, looking for a sense of constancy. So maybe that certain places places sometimes take on more importance, even though they may not be that one central place.
Yeah, absolutely, and so my commentary on this is, my project began as looking at diaspora's investment in Nigeria, in Africa generally, and then I began to talk to Nigerians, and then in talking to Tosi, who's a low fellow here, she began to say, actually, Igbo people do this on a different scale than anyone else, any other tribe, and she's Yoruba herself, and someone from the north had mentioned a similar thing to me, and I didn't realize it because I'm Igbo myself. And that began this process of like, why do we go home to the village so often? Why are we so specific about contributing to the village, not the city? It's not, it's where we were raised, where our families were raised, where generations were raised, and the Biafran War began to be a part of that conversation. So thank you for your answers. That comment really related to what I was thinking as well. So now we know the flow. Yeah, exactly. This is how the next part will be. 2 more times. I do. Yes.
In the press, I work with PBS. In the press, the Biafran, the Igbo people had a myth about them in the American, African American world. And I just throwing that out there to see how much did that myth that was very, very prominent in the U.S., at least with educated people. Did that in any way affect what was going on?
When you say the myth, is it
The myth of there's a special Igbo landing.
Igbo landing, yes.
Yeah, that was a huge,
that was
huge, beautiful myth that.
Igbo land. Well, maybe I'll come back to that
Sure.
because it's a bit of a different topic. But thank you, Mario. And I also see the image, Bolade. You wanna place that one?
Yeah.
This
But
that
it's-
one? Yeah, we need this one, right here.
Wow. It says memory.
You're good, you're good. It says memory.
Yeah, it says memory. Yeah.
Oh, good to know, but sorry about that. That's my fault.
I can read.
Thank you so much. We're going through this together. Thank you all for your answers and partaking. This is fun. I hope it's fun. Oh, they were switched. This one said something. Oh, okay. Thank you. Wonderful. So now we move into ingenuity. And this section begins to map key cities and innovations in Biafra during the war. So beginning with these lifelines from the sky, a tactic of the Nigerian military was a maritime blockade using British naval vessels cutting off food supply. Churches, charities in foreign states such as France, Germany, and eventually USAID and the Red Cross began to organize airdrops to Biafra. And while Biafra is at the same time innovated the Uli airstrip, or the Annabelle, which is today's Annabelle state, to receive this aid. So as the world's conscience was stirred by the images of famine and distress, we also led to the creation of Doctors Without Borders. Fun fact came from the Biafran War. An estimated 3 million people, many children, perished, mainly from starvation, or what they call as kwashiorkor, which is a protein deficiency, and relief came quite late for many others. This is quite interesting in terms of the population of Nigeria at the time, which was approximately 54 million, 6 to 7 million of them being of Igbo descent. So there's a mix of ethnic groups in that southeastern region, so it's not just Igbo people, but this could be at least one-fourth, one-third of a population gone after this war. And many people were displaced from their villages. They normally farmed yams, beans, raised goats or chickens, and stockfish, or Eburuoh, is a major source of protein in Igbo cuisine, but it was eaten commonly pre-war, but was imported from Norway. So this was no opportunity during the blockades, and the ports were either captured or rendered inaccessible in the war, especially Port Harcourt in the south in 1916. As the strife progressed, innovations such as the Ojugu bucket, which the soldiers are currently holding, as well as the indigenous refinery known as the cooking pot on the bottom there, were created, as was the rapid cultivation of fast-maturing crops like cassava, maize, okra, vegetables, and yams to encourage the fight against this famine. Also schools, such as what you see on the right-hand side, were really turned into these safe houses and feeding stations for the general public. Women also led community farming, rationing, and underground food networks. So this mother's resistance that we see here defined the war efforts, and we have an audience that's doing that perspective. Well, a woman narrating her experience of going to the market on a typical day, and then air raid begins of the Nigerian troops bombing that marketplace, and just her experience of running with her family, of trying to grab as much as they could on the way out, and eventually surviving. And this is an older woman, so she's recounting those from about 30 years prior. Audio will play either. But soldiers as young as 13 were sent for training. This image juxtaposes two young children in the background carrying buckets to fill water for the home, and instead in the foreground are carrying the Ojugu bucket, the rifle, and weapons for the war. Music was also a rallying cry among soldiers. songs, pass coded messages, sustain morale, and memorialize losses, as did many images of propaganda on both sides of the war, which began to create these narratives of the war itself.
Biafra, go on, go on, go on, go on, go on, go on. Obenigo menana Biafra, na just go on, go on, you, go on, go on, you, go on, go on, you. Oh, yeah, man, Joe, go on, they will go.
That audio was also from an individual recalling the war from his past and being a schoolboy who was then sent out into the war at the age of 14. So, this is my invitation to all those who have the ingenuity puzzle pieces to, in order from one, to read their piece out loud.
And hunger we built with prayer and plywood, waiting for heaven to fall.
Out of soil and siege, seed and steel, we engineered survival.
The hands that once fetched water now held thunder in a homemade pail.
Mothers mapped meals from famine, their courage measured in grains.
Ingenuity. In what ways does propaganda create helpful narratives for us? Helpful narratives for action versus harmful narratives of representation.
You can start to put your pieces up, and also we can begin to discuss this question together. Again, openly, in however way you would like to answer the question.
Can you repeat the question?
I can repeat it. It's also
Let's put the puzzles up, pieces up first, and then read the question again.
You had it easy
Oh,
with
wow.
Dan.
Yeah, right there.
Right by the pan.
That one's easy. Oh,
That's why they can choose that one, Dan.
Yes, yes.
A lot of comments.
Yeah.
How many people are
Okay,
watching?
guys, what's the question again?
18.
Sorry. That's great.
I texted all the group chats.
Also working. In what ways does propaganda create helpful narratives for action versus harmful narratives of representation or misrepresentation?
One or two responses?
It's just such a brilliant question. It would
Yeah,
take
it's
a long time to answer.
Overloaded
Yeah.
question.
But it's a brilliant question. I mean, I think we get asked that about almost every
Yeah.
context that we live in.
I think it's, I can't help but think of it as an organizing tool. You know, not always for positive, I guess it depends who you are, but the idea of narrative or how we, or exercises like this are organizing tools to kind of create collective identity.
Absolutely.
I'll offer, I think it depends on who's designing the propaganda, right? And I do think the language of photography versus caricature versus abstraction, like the language of the art of the propaganda, you know, probably has something, is saying something. So in whose hands that is being curated, I think matters, but we can pick that up more.
Can I add one
Up to
now?
that.
That's why my time. Just thinking about whether a narrative or like gives life to a collective versus an individual experience of war. And just to throw the publics onto that, at what point does it create a narrative about a kind of a future public unity as opposed to kind of individual torment and loss?
And I just realized she's got the clue to where our pieces go on the screen.
Yeah.
You can look at the screen
Yeah.
before you go up.
It's also on your postcards if you want to start looking at them. So that's the reason why you got your postcard.
I think there's also a question about even the word propaganda and what we attach it to. But I think it is also possible that once you attach that word, then it can also be doubted.
Sorry, it can also.
It can also be doubted.
Oh, yeah.
And we should pick that up some more, because as a class, we talked about propaganda and manifesto in their meeting quite a bit. So I'd love for us to pick that up again at the end. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you all. And now we'll move on to silence and memory. They're labeled individually, but we'll recall them as one for everyone who has those final cards. So as the final weeks of the war, Biafra's last cities, Umahia, Aka, and Owerri, fell one by one. Umahia's fall in December of 1969 marked the collapse of Biafra's command center, and by January 1970, only a small territory remained. The war ended in 1970 with Biafra's surrender, and with it came the words from Nigeria's head of state, General Gowan, "No victor, no vanquished." I'll skip this for the sake of time. These words, "No victor, no vanquished," were meant to symbolize unity. Yet returning Igbos often found their homes looted, savings seized, facing continued discrimination. Displaced people faced destroyed towns, trauma, and no public healing. The promise of reconciliation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction was a policy known as the 3 Rs, and it aimed to reintegrate Biafrans, rebuilding war-torn areas and assist displaced peoples. This is a bit of what we see as the 3 Rs, also located on the side here. One key policy was the "No victor, no vanquished" declaration, as I mentioned, to promote that unity and avoid the punishment of former Biafrans. Another was a 20-pound policy, which controversially gave all Biafrans only 20 pounds, regardless of their actual bank holdings before the war, which were all taken during the war. The government also invested in rebuilding infrastructure and public services in the Southeast. However, many critics argue that implementation fell short, especially in economic rehabilitation. Which leads me to a really important quote for me throughout this entire project. True reconciliation and post-conflict peace building is transformative rather than restorative. So considering what that meaning actually was for this particular circumstance. But Biafrans themselves began grassroots memorialization, like the Center for Memories in a New State, started in 2017, so quite recently, by a group of scholars and professors. It holds memorials of the Civil War, as well as celebrates annual Biafra Remembrance Day, which is May 30th, if anyone wants to celebrate with me. Also, quotes like the one we see here. There was a country by Chioma, Hafio Sun by Jimenda Ngozi tell the war's truths across generations, even introducing many Nigerians that I got to talk to throughout this last month to the war, who themselves had never heard of the Biafra War. So, although the National War Museum in the southeastern Nigeria is officially recognized, its narratives are not integrated into the nation holistically. The educational systems do not incorporate this war, and media related to Biafra have been censored or outright excluded. So they tell these partial stories, and the Biafra narratives often remains in the shadows. I'd like to now invite our final pieces to be read aloud, final poem and our final question.
Our cities fell as our memories marched, treading on behind bare feet.
No victor, no vanquished, only vanished voices and veiled grief.
To return is not to find, but to rebuild what once remembered you.
The 3 R's read like balm, but silence wounds where memory dares to sleep.
Freedom was a drumbeat. We marched so the future could listen.
Reconstruction we saw would neither rehabilitate or reconcile.
In Eburuoh, we gathered fragments, grasping for remembrance.
And our novels became altars, each page a psalm against forgetting.
I believe we have our last question.
Yes. When leadership has chosen to forget, who is responsible for keeping memory alive? What are the ways of keeping memory alive?
I'll invite each person as we ponder that to place the final images on the board. And then follow me up.
Come this way.
I see what you have right here.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so we started here, and now we've ended here. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, but we're not done yet.
She's got 4 more minutes.
We'll
Who
use
would
the
like to
4 minutes.
respond to the last question?
When leadership has chosen to forget, who is responsible for keeping memory alive?
We've got 2 respondents.
The topic of remembering and remembering, for me, it's sort of like juxtaposed. On one end, we have sort of like what happened in South Africa. The idea that we should sit down, talk about the past, and be able to heal going forward. But at the same time, the question is, do we really heal when we remember? Do we really heal when we remember to remember, right? This idea is brought forward by post-colonial writers, such as Schola, who talk about the need to look back in order to move forward. And I come from a country where we don't know our past and how it informs how we move into the future. So for me, it's like, you know, I still struggle between do we remember or do we accept that we you know, just forget and move forward.
Yeah, I think one of the ways we can keep this memory is through storytelling and, you know, music as well. I remember vividly every night when I was younger, my mom always tells us this story about, you know, this Biafra voice. And whenever she tells the story, I see because she was a baby then, but I see the pain in her eyes, like whenever she tells the story. And then after she tells the story, she sings us the song. And even when I went back home, you know, we always go back home every December for Christmas. I still see fragments of the words, like burnt building, abandoned places, like it's already growing like grass everywhere and all that. So the only way we can keep this memory is like through passing this, you know, story from one generation to the other for our, you know, descendants to still remember what happened, you know, in the evil land. Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Few weeks ago, at church, it's an Old Testament reading. And a series of them over the next few days, they popped up. God saying, I will forgive and I will forget. And that's, we all heard, oh, it has another, you know, because we're thinking, no, we have to remember, but God said, I will forgive and I will forget. So put that in your pipes and smoke it.
Well, thank you all. We built this puzzle, we've heard the stories, yet the puzzle is still unfinished. There are many unheard voices in the shadows of this war. So this memory is living, and I thank you all for participating in it. And although we participate in this act of rebuilding, it takes every single day and it takes moment by moment. So I just want to thank you all again for joining me and taking part in this remembering. And I have more postcards. So this is the completed map.
I want that one.
Yeah.
So let's invite our invited reviewers to take up any of Schola's questions and just important to give her feedback on her work specifically. So who would like to begin? Would you like to begin? Excellent, fantastic.
I think this was really wonderful. I've talked to Schola a couple of times, and I thought your project was headed in
No, it's on board.
in one direction, which was to do with
Me too.
which was to do with money and transfer.
Well, that was this semester. You did that.
Yeah,
You did it.
it's really changed. Although it's not. It's not. Yes, it's not unrelated, and it was part of. You mentioned it when we were trying to understand why remittances had the kind of money they did. That somebody had explained it to me, so I can see that it's absolutely connected. I would nevertheless like to start with a slight critique, but constructive. One is that I'm surprised that you would use the word tribe repeatedly, because it's problematic. I mean, the word tribe is often used to suggest that there's irrationality and an impossibility of explanation. So whenever you have conflicts and the word tribe gets put on there, then it actually produces the context in which the world can ignore it, because tribal is too, it's too irrational. It's not something that one can actually understand unless you're within that world. And these guys, they're not tribe. I mean, even in a definition of what the word tribe means, Yoruba is not tribe, Igbo is not tribe, Hausa is not tribe. These are huge national populations. So better use the word ethnicity. In the Balkan Wars, recently, nobody spoke about them as tribes. But essentially, what produced those conflicts were not unrelated to kinds of misunderstanding that actually produced the Biafra war. Second thing is, and I think I heard that you're South African just from your Botswana first part.
Very close.
That there was a Truth and a Reconciliation Commission. I don't know if you're aware of it.
Yes.
So it would have been really interesting to include that in this in your narrative as to the modeling on South Africa. A sort of real attempt to make that happen, but how it ultimately failed. Certainly when it's put next to South Africa, which also kind of was only partially a success. But I think it's a great project, a great summary of a difficulty that still lives in 21st century Nigeria.
Thank you so much for your comments, for the tribe and ethnicity comments, and also for your last comment about the comparative approach of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In my syllabus, there's a lot.
You're going to learn about it in the class.
So yeah, you'll learn about it in the class, don't worry, there's more. A lot of readings about it. But I looked at South Africa, I looked at the Holocaust. My actual inspiration for this, the one reason why I jumped ship was for spring break, I actually went to Rwanda, which I remember turning to Tina and I told her, I'm going to change my profession. I literally did. And the first thing that we did when we went on that trip was the Kigali Genocide Memorial. And it's the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. And really, they have this, what they call the Peace Education Colloquium, which is integrating education into every aspect of school education, of the museum itself, of peace talks throughout universities in the country, and it was just so expansive and so incredible to hear about it. And that's when I was like, how would Nigeria do something? And I talking with Tony about this, just began, this class would be that opportunity to allow students to explore means of expressing these histories that are difficult. And maybe this becomes like a pop-up somewhere. I had a podcast with my midterm, to go back to the midterm, which is other ways. Yeah, you can actually see my midterm as well today if you would like to. And opportunities to integrate other ways of expressing this information.
And I think if she had come to this idea at the beginning of the semester, because it was in the middle of the semester, because she did her mid-semester, talking to you, when Tawana came back and pivoted, she would have dived into this more, because she came back going, oh, I'm gonna create this kind of toolkit. And I was like, about what? But we had to unpack the what, right? And the remaining weeks couldn't hold getting to those. So she very much was interested in that proposition, the comparisons to it, and really trying to create this pivot from no victor, no vanquish, right? And and the original propositions of the war and how they were not realized in the 3R to something different that was this juxtaposition between the reconciliation and transformation. So I think she used this as lifelong work. So I'm hoping she will find collaborators to continue it. But let's keep going with some feedback. Was it, Gina, did you have up your hand, or Diane?
So this is just such a beautiful and amazing project that I like really touched me. So I want to say that first. I just, even in the classes of mine, I know you're just in the larger political economy and real estate, but this is just so powerful. So I have like no criticisms of the project. I do want to pull out a couple threads, and if you continue it, then it struck me as worth doing. And maybe the most important one is getting back to this last statement, thinking what Mario said about forgetting and remembering. No, this, when you, it's our responsibility is not just to recall the facts, but to carry the memory of resistance, ingenuity, silence with care. So there are some things you need to remember, and there's some things you need to forget. So it's something in between. And I think that and that's been the journey for you. What you needed to remember and what you want to forget while you still remembering the resistance, the ingenuity, and the ingenuity. I'm not sure about the silence, but again, because you want to move to the future. And that's a thread in some of the projects here, and I love the framing, Tony, of this, because it allows this constant dialogue between past, present, and future for almost all the projects. And that's so important. It's so important for us in a design school, because sometimes we think we're just looking at the future, but we're really like struggling with the past and the present. So I just love it, and I think you can play again with what's to remember and what's to forget, because part of it is forget and forgive some things, but other things are your fuel for making the next future. One other thing, let me also say that I love your use, and others have done this, but the use of collage. I think it's really, really beautiful, and that leads to the last comment. If you were going to develop this a little bit more, I'm obsessed with territoriality, obviously. This thing, but you start with the British, there's British colonial rule, and I love your map about how they just throw, for control and hegemony, they throw different peoples together in one place so they can fight among themselves. So there is a kind of territoriality that's given under colonial rule. Then you have independence, but then the government itself continues with this kind of divide and conquer within the territory of the nation. So it seems to me that it would be fun to hear a little bit more about how the Biafra, and thinking about that as a urban-rural territory. I don't know what language we use, in the world that we're living in. What is the kind of the built environmental knowledge of the place, and should that be part of the memories in the not in the old story, but stories about the physicality of the experience? And I think you were kind of getting into that, but maybe build that a little bit more, because you even mentioned which cities fell first. Well, I want to know, what does that mean when this city fell first? Where did people go? Did they go to the other city? And do they connect cities in their subnation, in their new autonomous place. And I just think that you could layer, that could be a part of the collaging, the historical collaging that brings it back to, and then they're reclaiming those territories and those habitable spaces for themselves. So anyway, I just think it's.
And before we go to Dan, so this is my only, not even critique, the things that I would ask about, like to try to push the land story into it. And I think the land story is really about the physicality. So if we were to look at the original, before the puzzle collage pieces, and by the way, the students had collaging as an exercise, and that's why you see them so much of it. But when this came to light for us maybe 10 days ago, and she started to put the values on it, one is like, so are the values really situated where some activity or counter-activity to that value is happening geographically? And then what was happening in that geographically? Because she talks about the oil extraction, food famine, destruction of agricultural lands, and then you, in the story about you and your mom, talked about buildings that are still visible but are crumbling that you know are destroyed. And so I think the only thing missing, to use Diane's word, is the physicality of what was there, what was removed, and what was disrupted. And I think either some of that's hard to piece together with the fragmented histories that exist that require more time. But I think that was, and you and I talked about that, that was something I kept sort of asking myself, what's the land piece of it? Let's go to Dan next.
Yeah, amazing project. I loved, in a truly kind of collaborative pedagogy, making us all read makes us become a part of the narrative in a deeper way than you kind of, just talking or telling it to us. But I want to go to the 3 R's, and it reminded me so much, you're talking about the physicality of built environment. Reminded me a lot of Levius Wood's War and Architecture text, and in it he has 3 R's. There are 3 R's in that one saying, he talks about the first two as being problematic. The first one is post-conflict in Sarajevo, which is his site of inquiry. You cannot restore, because if you restore, you're affirming the political ecology that brought the harm in the first place. You cannot replace, because a full replacement is an act of erasure. You have to rebuild. You have to rebuild on top of the scarred, wounded architecture, the ruin. It reminds me very much of what Jeannie Gang's talking about now with grafting, where it's very clearly one material system that's grafting onto another. And so I just wanted to give that to you, like.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful. Last couple of comments, Rebecca and Chioma, and then Schola has the last word.
Sure, I think, well, I want to second what everyone was saying. This is so beautiful. And you said touch, and I was thinking the word move. I just felt very moved learning from you as your student and as a respondent. So I wanted to focus on just the practice that you developed by, I've not done this before, like hold a piece of a puzzle and with others create this compilation of images that tells and teaches us the story, or one version, this like sort of plurality of versions of the story. And I just found that so compelling. I don't know if you've done that before, if you just came up with it, but I think it's like as a pedagogical practice really provocative to me. And to hear this many voices together and hear you presenting this and look at the image building, it's just a very nourishing experience that I think could also go into each of these pieces could have additional modules. And I think maybe this is part of what you were saying, Diane. I think that the project can hold even more information, but that you've designed a framework for that. And I was able to take in all that you were sharing. So it just takes so much. I know when I've done map making, the hardest part is like letting go of a lot of the potential noise that could be confusing or make things too complex to quickly take in. But the way you presented this very complex situation, I was able to absorb that, and I think that's like a part of the success of it. So congratulations.
Schola has the last word.
Scholars, thank you so much. I'm so happy and proud of you and to be part of some of those initial conversations with you. Conversations in Rwanda. Conversations, what was that? Rwanda. And you told me what I think it was 18, which is like, okay, see y'all in 2 weeks. So I'm just really both inspired, but I also thank you for bringing us along this poetic journey. Pulling in your family to be able to live stream and also, I would call what I'm referring to as your method of engagement. Bringing us in with you and pausing and waiting and engaging these questions in your presentation. I thought about a few things. One is 3 things that stood out for me. Thinking about the spatialization of violence in terms of the mapping and through the imagery that you share with us. Thought about the spatialization of memory. And they're not the same. One is they're not counteracting each other, but how they stand side by side, with violence and memory. And then lastly, thinking about the spatialization of belonging. I feel like sometimes we often conflate memory, a collective memory, with healing, and they're not the same. So to remember is not necessarily to heal, but it can create a pathway forward to get to what that may be. And so thinking about that spatialization of violence, how we're acknowledging it, what happened that should not have happened, but it did. You can't go back. That spatialization of memory, and also that belonging. And then lastly, I was thinking about how to bring in the contemporary into this conversation, both not, I mean, I feel like we do it here with the reconciliation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, and also what is present day Nigeria, besides the lack, because you do it, but besides the lack of awareness of this history, what is present today, what's present today in ways that were not then. And one of the things we talked about in comparing Rwanda and Nigeria, Nigeria had oil. And the ways in which people look at Rwanda as a flagship post the genocide against the Tutsi is very different. And so, and then we have South Africa, you mentioned Botswana, like, how do we think about that relationship and then think about the broader dynamics of what happened in the 1800s with the partition, right? And what's happening today, I think would be cool. And then lastly, in terms of the future, which I would love to collaborate as one. I can see this definitely if you have the curriculum, the syllabus, I can see it again as I'm really into, I am all about the publics. But think about public history initiative. How can this be part of either both a museum, also thinking about curriculums for schools, also as relates to oral histories, and also thinking about public archives and how to make this accessible in different places, in different contexts, across the diaspora, where people can access and contribute to. I think there's so many other ways of framing it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Schola, you get the last 60 seconds.
Well, I just have to say thank you to every single person. Look at each of you in the eye. Thank you so much for being here. I know all of you. I know all of you by name. So thank you for listening to my nagging comments. Thank you for Jim for flying all the way from DC. Jim is my professor from undergrad at Catholic University in DC. He's been a lifelong, well, it feels like lifelong, mentor. Why I applied to Harvard in the first place. So Jen, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of my friends who come to support, and our critics, our wonderful critics, for your honesty and your care with your comments. I really appreciate it. To all my family, I really appreciate it. I do want to make a quick bout of remembrance to my grandma, who actually passed away this week. This project is dedicated to her and her experience of the war, also being really key in thinking through this. So again, thank you for being a part of my family, honestly, and my history for today and for this experience. Thank you.
So we have a solid 10 minutes. 2-minute break because the students have to reconfigure this room. I just want to say just another part of our process, when Rebecca, you asked the question about how the puzzle came to be. One of the last things we did as a group was everybody went around and presented where they were with the work, and we workshopped everybody's project together. And so we had different ideas, we're like, should you do this podcast, or should you do this, and like, we had 3 different ideas, and I think Wednesday we came back, we're like, oh, let's do this, and then all of a sudden they kind of clicked. So when you hear the students in Schola did it really specifically thanking the room, it's because there really was collaboration, and every student did what they got to. So, all right, 10 solid minutes. Be back here at 2:40. Students, help Ellie rearrange the room.
打开你的 AirDrop， 谢谢。打开你的 AirDrop， 我给你拍了好多。
哎，我手机呢？有小偷。哎，我的手机。
OK，I think 你的手机壳长什么？哦，刚才他说了他有关的时候，真的都有点感动。
我是帮他保水。
真的，那个 theater 非常，yeah， 很有趣。而且真的像。
All right, you got 8 minutes. Rearrange.
You are amazing.
Rebecca.
Yeah, they're still there. The X?
Look at my dad. Well, thank you guys for helping. Thank you for hear everything. Sorry for the last minute change.
Do I X?
Oh, they're so cute.
There were 18 people.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Want to say hi?
Oh.
Jennifer's here. I'm the camera woman. The camera woman, the everything woman. So good. Schola. Hey. Oh yes. Sorry.
Okay. It's Schola, is it just the X?
I think so.
Okay.
No, I know. But I'm not teaching.
Okay.